Today's topic is going to be about how to use a bad environment in your advantage. Basically, let's be honest, there is no bad environment. There is an environment you live in and the one you can afford to live in. And long story short, we keep talking about like, hey, you can improve your health by doing these things and those things. We already kind of unconsciously have done these things, and then we have been thrown into a different environment, and then we feel that it affects us slightly different.
Yeah.
More often than not, we though see that people who might not live in the most healthiest environment be extremely successful. Is there something in environments that has helped them, or maybe we can manipulate different environments to get best of both settings? Because let's be honest, if we periodize what we do, that's when we get the best results. You know, if you are always on a high and never experience low, you're going to end up depressed.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
So, what do you think? What have you seen? What is your experience? What literature says about current environments that people live? And is there something that can be taken from, let's say, rural area and then other types that we can maybe put ourselves in a set time of the year to get something different out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So more and more, the way that I have kind of put together health, right? Health in general, meaning you don't go to the doctor, you don't have illnesses, and you feel well. That's separate from body composition and muscle mass and all of that. Those types of things are going to require proof of work. You're just going to have to do the work to get those. But you have to first have good health, right? And we've touched on this a lot, right? Hey, you can be working your butt off to like get more muscle or lose body fat, but if your environment is not conducive for health, you end up with hormonal things that are holding you back from exploiting that, right? So the baseline of the pyramid is the environment. The environment and how you interact with it dictates your ability to create certain hormones. Now I'm going to share this screen just so that we can have something to speak to of what I'm talking about, right? So one of the key functions are here at the top, right? You have beta-alanine and tyrosine with the help of UV light gets turned into precursors for your thyroid system, that's T3 and T4. It gets turned into flavonoids and dopa to be able to create melanin, dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline if you're not hypoxic. So if you have good oxygen saturation at the blood level, this moves in this direction. If you have poor oxygenation or pseudo-hypoxia, it moves from melanin down and to the left in this direction when you're hypoxic, right? Now, we're going to be talking about that, but it goes, and this happens for tryptophan, which is serotonin and melatonin, and it also happens for histidine, which is histamine and uric acid, right? These all of these work in both directions. When you're oxygenated well and environment is healthy for you, it moves to the right in all of these situations and to the left in a hypoxic environment, right? So, having said that, the things that are going to produce good health are being able to create melanin all the time, because when you are able to create melanin, you have good thyroid system. When you're able to create melanin, you can acutely make that melanin into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. When you're able to create melanin, we know that you're not hypoxic, which also means that tryptophan is making the right amount of serotonin, and you're also making the right amount of melatonin. So sleep is good. So when you can tan well, whatever environment allows you to tan well, it is a good enough environment that you can have good dopamine production and good sleep and good immune system response, because histamine is an immune regulator and uric acid is also an immune regulator in terms of UV light. So in other words, it's to help stabilize oxygen tensions when UV light is interacting with you. And when you're hypoxic, right, when your environment is not so good for you, and good and bad is in reference to the things that we've talked about in all of our other videos, right? Good amount of sunlight, very low amounts of electromagnetic fields, very low amounts of blue light interacting with you at the wrong times of day. Those are what I would consider baseline good environments, right? And some will be better than others for certain things. But when you're in a semi-good environment, you'll be able to create melanin well, you'll be able to create melatonin well, and you'll be able to control uric acid and histamine well. When you're in a bad environment, it just means that you're hypoxic from one shape or another. That means you either have poor solar yield, or you have an electromagnetic field close to you, or you have a lot of bright blue light on at night. And that's bad in the circumstance that you're not creating these, but if you've cultivated them, right? If you've gone out of your way, or you're coming from summertime and you did have good sunlight and a lot of time outside and very little electromagnetic field interaction while you were doing that, then you cultivated these to be able to be used when you're in a bad environment, which could be low sunlight, high amounts of electromagnetic fields, or bright light. And when you do that, when you create hypoxia, you take melanin and you actively turn it into dopamine, and take dopamine and actively turn it into adrenaline and noradrenaline. Those are great. Those are great for creativity. Those are great for new ideas. Those are great for sitting down and getting shit done, right? Like those are ways that you can leverage an environment, and you can do it from day to day, right? Like right now, I'm getting a lot of sunlight. I'm outside. I'm not next to my Wi-Fi router, etc. I'm probably going to make some melanin today. I'm probably going to stimulate my thyroid system today. But let's just say, for example, I needed to be creative. I needed to create a new training program for a client or something like that, or something of that nature. Would I do it right now? Probably not. I would probably actually feel more motivated and more creative and probably get it done faster if I waited till about evening time, right as the sun is setting or right after the sun is set. And I went into my office, turned on a bunch of bright lights really, really quickly, and just kept them on and put in some earbuds with electromagnetic field interacting with my head, and I'm actively going to turn melanin into dopamine almost immediately upon inducing that new environment, right? So technically, that's a bad environment. I'm disrupting my circadian rhythm. I am putting downward pressure on melatonin and keeping it as serotonin. I'm changing how histamine responds, and I might get a mild inflammation effect. I'm not too worried about that, because what I'm trying to do right then and there is, for about 1 hour, I want to get a lot of stuff done, right? I want to get the training program out. I want to record some videos for the client. I want to send it to the client and get it all emailed and sent. I want to actively deplete some melanin into dopamine, into adrenaline and noradrenaline, and really get the brain juices flowing, for lack of a better way to say it, right? You can do that with a bad environment. In fact, doing it in a bad environment accelerates how much melanin you're going to turn into dopamine. You can actively feel that. But then if you do that too often, you don't get the same feel anymore. And a lot of creative people run into that issue. It's almost like, they talk about having their muse or something along those lines. And they're like, yeah, I just don't really have it right now. What they don't have is they've been depleting their melanin for too long. They need to go through a collection part of everything that they were getting when they were creative. The collection part starts with,
would it be nutrition? Would it be environment? Would it be something else?
the biggest mover is going to be environment, not being hypoxic. We know, and we've had a podcast specifically on how electromagnetic fields create hypoxia. So one of the first things that I would say is just taking the time to get out of a modern environment, even for a day or two, especially in the summertime, because in the summertime, there's good sun pretty much everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So just going out of your way to go to a park, or going to a nature preserve, or even, they're free, they're everywhere. The frisbee golf places, right? Those are usually always secluded, or golf itself, right? They're always secluded. They're always off on the fringes of like a suburb, or even actually out in a nature preserve. You're going to get a lot of sunlight there. So that's changing your environment, and most likely you're out in nature. So that's going to mean that there's no hypoxia going on. So now you're actively turning these amino acids and moving in this way. Now you mentioned something. Would there be a nutritional intervention to be coupled with that day or that series of days that you do that? And yes, it would start with a very large amino acid meal. These are all amino acids. These are all amino acids right here. So the key thing is just get a bunch of protein in at the very beginning of the day, somewhere around 50 grams minimum for this action to be accelerated. There is a potentiation effect. More protein up to around 70 grams is kind of the cutoff, but 50 is where it starts. So somewhere between 50 and 70 grams of protein, you will get a additive effect of having these amino acids in the bloodstream actively at that time. Because when these are in the bloodstream, what do your blood vessels do when they get exposed to the sun? They come to the surface. They are intentionally coming to the surface to become oxygenated and for these amino acids that are in your bloodstream to get interacted by blue light. Why is that important? Because UV light can only penetrate your body up to about 1 inch. It can't penetrate very far. So you need your blood vessels that are carrying these amino acids to come to the surface. When you're in strong sunlight, they always come to the surface. So it basically accelerates this whole process. A large protein bolus, getting a lot of skin in the game, getting a lot of sunlight, and preferably out in nature to some extent. Everybody can afford to take a little trip, 30-minute drive, 60-minute drive, once or twice a week to just get out, if you live in a city, right? For some people, it might not even be that big of a drive. It might be like, hey, I'm just gonna walk to the edge of town, which could be a 15-minute walk, right? Or a 15-minute.
Let's be honest, it might be just go outside for the sake of going outside, because most people just jump in a car and go straight to office and they don't expose themselves to outside at all.
Yeah, well, that's 100% true. It really depends on your lifestyle. You could live in a perfectly healthy environment. You just don't ever expose yourself to it, right? Of strong sunlight, lots of a big protein bolus in the day, and just getting a lot of skin involved so that all your blood, because the more skin is involved, more blood vessels come to the surface, right? If I just have just my arms involved, only the blood vessels in my arm are going to come to the surface. That's a very limited surface area that's going to be bringing these amino acids to be interacted with by sunlight to turn into all these positives, right? When you have a lot of skin involved, you will literally sometimes see blood vessels in your abs that are coming to the surface that you normally would never have seen, or blood vessels in your back. Same thing, right? So
what
more
about any
surface.
supplements or even drugs or whatever, because a lot of people will just go like, hey, what can I take?
Yeah, honestly, there really won't be anything that you can take, because even there are drugs, right? There are drugs that accelerate melanin production. Alpha MSH or melanotan 1 or melanotan 2 is the drug name that they call it. They still don't work without sunlight. Like, people know this, right? You can inject it as much as you want, but nothing happens until you get sunlight on you. So there are drugs that can accelerate, because melanin is the one thing when it comes to creative and leveraging a bad environment. You need melanin, right? You need melanin on your surfaces, because melanin gets integrated into your nervous system, specifically in the brain and in the eye. And when you're hypoxic, those melanin sheets in the brain and in the eye are what actively get turned into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, which are going to help you in creativity, pattern recognition, and the ability to execute cognitively, right? You need melanin to do that. So even though there are drugs that accelerate melanin production, they do not work without sun or UV light, right? You could use a tanning bed for some of this action, but you're not going to get the full action, right? Some UV beds will only have UVA, some will only have UVB, very few will have both. If they had both, you would get more of the action, because some UVA stimulates more of the melanin, UVB stimulates more of the thyroid stuff, and more of the melatonin stuff, whereas UVA stimulates more of the serotonin. So different types of UV light stimulate some of these processes a little bit more than others. Whereas if just strong sunlight, you have all of them. You have every single iteration of the UV spectrum, except for UVC, unless you live in California. And then coincidentally, you also have the antidote to UV damage of the skin, which is infrared light, because infrared light actively spins the ATPase, gives you energy, and gives you, when you make ATP with infrared light, you also make more water, more cellular water. So it keeps you hydrated, keeps collagen hydrated, keeps skin hydrated, even though you're getting stimulation from UV light, which is naturally dehydrating. But from the sun, it doesn't matter. It cancels itself out, because 50 to 70% of the light from the sun is infrared, and then the other 30% is the UVA and the UVB, which are creating all these processes. So this brings me to a little bit of something that some people may be familiar with them, nomad capitalist, which is basically a guy who teaches people how to have different citizenships all across the planet, because different places will treat different parts of your ability to live differently. For example, you might want to have a citizenship in a country that's very pro corporations or very pro business, right? And you have your business there because you have a citizenship there, and you only conduct you set up your LLCs in that business because the government is very pro businesses. They give you tax breaks. They may even give you free incentives and stuff like that because you have your business in that country. So you don't necessarily live there, but you have your business there. Whereas other countries, you can live there, and if you live there, your income, no matter where it's coming from the planet, from everywhere else, is tax-free. So you might want to have a citizenship in that and live in that particular country. And then you might want to have another citizenship where that particular country is fun to go to, right? They have a lot of fun things to do, and you visit there more of as a tourist, but you have a passport that goes there, and so then you get other perks of living there. That's this guy named the Nomad Capitalist. He teaches this to people. You go where you're treated best for certain parts of your life. This is no different. When you want health, some people will need to actually have a second home in a very nice sunny place where they can go a couple months out of the year if the environment that they normally live in doesn't provide the ability to cultivate these things year round. You might want to have a second place where you can take off for a month at a time whenever you feel you need to regenerate your melanin sheets and get your thyroid system working up better again, and more, and probably just as importantly, getting your melatonin, aka your sleep, moving in the right direction so that you can once again cultivate all these things. And then when you go back to a bad environment, you actually are better at performing than worse, right? There's a depletion effect. You have to have kind of a yin and yang effect. In the modern world, and with modern amenities like being able to fly to the other side of the planet in less than 24 hours, that should be an advantage that most people take up, right? Knowing this information gives you lots of different options for becoming healthy and using creativity to an extended amount, depending on where you are at and what season you're at, depending on where you live, right? Like, let's just say, for example, you're in New York, Long Island these days, right? Now it is getting summertime, so that means that more than likely you're getting stronger and stronger sun. But in the winter, I promise you, it's very hard to get this action of turning these amino acids into the final structure just because of lack of sunlight. It may be beneficial that if you were to live there permanently, to have a second place where you can either Airbnb or go to that's in Florida or that's in southern Georgia or southern Texas, right, where you get a lot of sunlight, or Southern California. Now, some of those places that I just named are better than others. Less population density is definitely going to be something that I consider because of the electromagnetic field effect on hypoxia. You could be in a sunny place in California and still be irradiated and still have hypoxia, and you still won't create these. So there's more than just the sunlight, but those are just some ideas that I'm putting out, right? So you pick a place that's conducive for having good oxygen tensions and good sunlight, and you go there for 2 or 3 months out of the winter months. If you live somewhere, like, for example, maybe you like living in New York, you really like it because you can network with a lot of people that are of your caliber of income, and there's a lot more opportunities there. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying, okay, great. But the longer you spend time there, especially in the winter, you will degrade these mechanisms in the backwards direction. Taking a month or 3 weeks here and there in the wintertime can stop that from happening, to make it so that you can take even more advantage of the connections that you have in New York, because you're going to be able to think better. You're going to be able to recognize patterns better because you're going to have better dopamine production all winter long. And then in the summertime, you might not have to worry about it in New York. New York probably gets, especially outside of the city, you're not really going to induce a lot of hypoxia because you won't have as much population density. And in the summertime, being in the northern hemisphere that New York is, you're probably going to get really, really strong sun. You're for sure going to get long days. You're going to get days where the sun comes up at 6 a.m. and doesn't set until almost 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. So that's a really long day of sun. You're going to be able to create a lot of melanin and really run the thyroid system if you're getting outside fairly regularly, 3 days out of the week where you're intentionally getting a suntan going, but at least daily viewing of morning sunlight will make sure that you're not hypoxic and always moving in this direction of the right.
What else can be done physically? Because you talk about oxygenation of blood and whatnot. So to me, it's straight away comes into mind, you need to be fit.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I always like pairing cardiovascular work in the morning, right? Because I'm not a biggest fan. I will do it, right, on an elliptical, but I like moving, right? I like actually walking better than I like being stationary. It keeps my mind involved more. And so if you're already going to want to be outside in the morning, and so it makes perfect sense for me to get my movement and my aerobic capacity work done in 20 minutes in the morning. I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone, really 3 birds with 1 stone. I'm teaching my body to upregulate enzymes to get a more robust oxygen delivery system, and I'm actively getting outside, so I'm already blunting hypoxia because red light, like I described earlier, creates ATP just by getting interaction with it and creates hydration. And also, as the light gets stronger, so in other words, once UV light is around, melanin takes the water that the mitochondria makes and charge separates it. What does that mean? It turns it into molecular hydrogen and molecular oxygen. So just sunlight alone can oxygenate your tissues by itself, which stops the hypoxic event of being indoors. So aerobic activity is crucial in terms of just making you fit enough to carry good amounts of oxygen and exchange them with carbon dioxide, because there's enzymes involved with that. You need to upregulate them, and the only way to upregulate them is to tax that system, right? So some aerobic work is required, and then the rest of it is changing the environment acutely at specific times of the day. And then you can change it back, just like we described before, of like, hey, I know that if I get, put earbuds in my ear, that I'm creating an electromagnetic field around my brain, and that's going to demyelinate my brain. Is it going to completely ruin myself in one go? No, absolutely not. If I do it once or twice, no big deal. In fact, at that point in time, I leveraged it to get more of these acutely. And people will notice that. When you have plenty of melanin after summertime or even during summer, people tend to be a little bit more creative, especially at night, especially when they have parties and stuff at night, gatherings with friends. Most of their best ideas will come at night when they're slightly hypoxic, but the day, right, during the day, they were able to create melanin that got turned into dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline.
I can definitely tell the difference between like living in UK and being here where I have been, because now every single morning I will wake up and I'll go outside and I'll have my coffee and I'll watch my sunrise coming up and do some journaling, and my brain is 10 times sharper than it was in UK. Like,
Yeah.
I just feel completely different.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if you, for example, let's just take you for an example. If you had to live in UK permanently, then in your case, you've already done the case study. Hey, whenever I go to somewhere tropical, if I can stay there for 2-3 weeks, I tend to get a really robust effect when it comes to mental performance and physical performance. So it would be one of
And
those
I
things.
can within hours, not days. I can literally go outside in the morning and come back black at night.
Yeah, and you will notice that. And then, so living in the UK permanently, it might be one of those things where, hey, what does it cost me really to fly to the Canary Islands, for example? That's a short flight for UK people, and it's very conducive for the things that I'm talking about. What does that really cost you, right? Budget that in for your yearly expense of, in the winter time in the UK, I'm going to take some time to spend a couple weeks there, or even the Mediterranean or something like that, right? That's still within the EU and very easy to travel to for most Europeans. For Americans, right, it could be Mexico. Mexico is literally a 3-hour flight for most people in America, and very cheap prices. You can go to the Yucatan, you can go to Puerto Vallarta, any of those places, very easy to get into. Spend a couple of weeks there, doesn't cost you that much money. For people that are, more affluent, they have more money, They can buy places in those places, right? And they can literally make money from those places when they're not at those places, right? You can turn it into a business venture, but you can go there whenever it's convenient for you to re-up on these biological effects of proper sunlight, low stress on the cellular environment, and high oxygen tensions. Another thing that will cause really high oxygen tensions are magnetic fields. Earth magnetic fields will raise oxygen tensions, and man-made electromagnetic fields will lower oxygen tensions. So going somewhere volcanic, right, like El Salvador or Costa Rica, you like if for example, if I were to review somebody's blood work and they clearly have a hypoxic environment going on, in other words, their hemoglobin is through the roof and they're not taking drugs that increase that, their hematocrit is through the roof and their red blood cell count is through the roof, that's telling me that their body is reacting to a hypoxic event. So the places that I would choose for somebody to get better in that situation or get more out of it would be somewhere where there's a lot of natural volcanic activity versus somewhere where there isn't, right? Because they'll get much more oxygenation tensions in Costa Rica, for example, than Florida, because Florida is not volcanic in nature. You're not going to get as big of a oxygen filling effect as in Costa Rica. So there's little things like this that you can decipher as far as like the exact place for you, because everybody's body will react a little bit different. For example, your hemoglobin and hematocrit never really did show a really outrageous discrepancy. Your hematocrit moved up and down, but that's not really, it has to be the combination of red blood cells, hemoglobin, and hematocrit that really shows a hypoxic environment. Yours never really showed that. But the thing that did show that was from the sex hormone side with you, which was prolactin, right? And so that actually told us that your body was actually not concentrating on the oxygen tension part of your environment. It was concentrating on the water, the hydration, the cellular hydration part of your environment, because prolactin is pro-cellular hydration. Your prolactin would go high because hydration is what your body was prioritizing versus hypoxia. And that could be purely the type of electromagnetic field that you're being induced by, which is hard to know, right? Because
and the higher it went, it was usually coinciding with more frequent flights.
Yeah. So that's a different electromagnetic field than just living next to a hospital, right? Now you're being exposed to actual dehydration because you're not grounded and you're closer to the ionosphere and you're getting more gamma waves and stuff like that because you're, less atmosphere. So it's one of those things where the particular stressful electromagnetic field environment that you're exposed to will cause very specific changes in your blood work. So long story short, that's kind of a way to hack knowing some of the stuff that we talk about and introducing some of those potential environmental changes to your advantage year round, depending on.
And this is bringing us to very first video we ever made, that understand your blood tests and understand that being in range does not mean it's good for you. Because if my blood tests were in range, I would probably felt horrible. But
yeah, you probably would. Yeah, you're 100% right. If your prolactin would, your people, obviously didn't see your blood work, but just as a reference, your prolactin was 9 times higher than the upper range of what's considered normal, right? 9 times. That's 900%. That's 900% higher than normal. And most people would have freaked out about that. But
and they would have felt horrible as well.
Yeah, and exactly, and you felt good. That's the point, is you felt good, and this number was way out of whack. Immediately, I go, you know what? I think this is actually what's making you feel good, because prolactin is a hydration hormone, and you're flying a lot, and you're being dehydrated a lot. Your body's just reacting appropriately to it. If you would have taken, and I know that you did, if you would have taken something to reduce prolactin, you probably would have felt shitty because you were trying to take something that your body's trying to keep you alive with and blunt it. And in fact, what happened when you took a little bit of cabergoline, which reduces prolactin?
That was the most horrible week of my life. I was like, not do that again.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
The way it is, my body understands exactly what to do.
Yeah, and again, everybody's body knows exactly what to do. You just have to pay attention to it, and just look back and be like, okay, what is my environment doing? What am I doing in my environment? What does my environment consist of? And does that make sense with what my body is doing? Your body is always going to want to keep you alive by any means necessary, right?
And would you
And
say
so,
that was specifically for me because of, let's be honest, I'm a little bit fitter than people my size. So, because would it be a too much of a guess away from what it actually was happening? Is that if somebody was not as fit and healthy, it might have affected them differently.
yeah, certainly a little bit of nuclear genetics, right? Because you are Latvian in nature, so you already come from a high altitude environment where being dehydrated from lack of sun and lack of solar yield is a natural consequence. So you probably already had some nuclear genetics on board to be able to even make that much prolactin, right? Just so people understand, the amount of prolactin Juris was making was the amount of prolactin that a lactating female will make during breastfeeding. Yeah, right. But obviously he wasn't breastfeeding and he didn't have anything coming out of his nipples. So
Yeah.
the fact that he possessed the capability to make that much prolactin was probably unique to you.
And
Right.
no
So,
side effects whatsoever.
yeah, and not having exactly, and not having any side effects because of where you come genetically, right? For me, I know that that probably wouldn't have played out that way because I come from a completely different part of the planet. My genetics, my nuclear genetics, right? My body probably still would have made the attempt to hydrate me and probably would have tried to raise my prolactin, but I probably would have experienced some side effect at some point from a very high prolactin, but it still would have kept me alive. It still would have kept my cells hydrated. You see what I'm saying? So that the particular situation that you might interpret will be individual in nature, but the things that move, right? The markers that move, they are moving for a very specific reason. And that's the thing that that's the thing I pay attention to the most when it comes to dialing in your environment, what you're eating, and what's going on with your blood work to be able to give you a really good, concise, low level of like, just do these 2 or 3 things, right? Because if I was a doctor or a naturopath, I could give you a million supplements that would have tried to help your prolactin. None of them would have done anything. They wouldn't have done anything, right? All I said was, well, Juris, this is probably normal. You're feeling good. Let's just keep track of it. And after the one little stint with the cabergoline, I'm like, don't do anything with the prolactin. In fact, I think the prolactin where it's at is probably benefiting you some way, shape, or form. And now it's normal, right? We've tested it after you stop traveling so much, and it returned back to normal. Lucky did we know. So what does that completely highlight? It highlights that your environment dictates a lot more than we give it credit for on how your body changes.
Yeah, and even how we got to this topic is as well as that I was just in California for a long period of time, and I came to New York, Long Island specifically, and within a day I had better tans than I had in California. Even though in California I was out there pretty much nearly naked every single day.
Yeah,
So,
yep,
and what changed was just I'm in a different place.
yep. Oxygen tensions could have changed, right? California is more hypoxic because they have more electromagnetic fields there versus upstate New York, right? You're also not necessarily living right in New York City. You're living outside the city. You probably have more trees around where you're at right now versus California. So oxygen tensions are higher. What did I just mention about oxygen tensions? When oxygen tensions go up, you're going to create more melanin. What did you just describe? Hey, within a day here, I got darker than I was in California, even though I had more sun in California. That is one of these environmental effects. Now, on the flip side, your sleep has come down mildly in New York versus California. What's the difference there? Sunlight yield, right? Way more sunlight in California. And I know that I've described this before in terms of sleep and immune system, but the more reactive oxygen species you make, the better your sleep will be. Higher sun makes more reactive oxygen species in the correct way that will make melatonin, right? So you're actually going to get a better sleep score. You're going to sleep more deeply when you get really high solar yield. We know that New York has less solar yield than California at this time of the year, so it makes sense that your sleep has dropped a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit compared to California, right? Little things like this make a difference if you really know what you're looking at. And everybody that's in this group that we have on school group is getting all this information, right? The details are in all of this. I'm not holding anything back. I know that some of it's really long form like this, but It is all there so that you can make accurate decisions about your blood work and your environment, and leveraging going to certain places at certain times of the year to get the most out of it.
Yeah, great, David. This is, as always, really thorough topic and a lot of things to take away with it. And like I said, like how he opens this video is like, there is no necessarily bad environment. You just understand where you're living at. You can use it in your advantage, but more often than not, understand that staying in the same place for a prolonged period of time in any kind of setting, may it be fitness, health, relationships, whatever, you need to mix it up now and then to get the best out of it and live life fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, and I'll speak to you next video.
Awesome. You too.